Section with Lieutenant Colonel Smith of the U.S. Marine Corps. He is the former battalion commander of Andy's unit, the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines. Colonel Smith.
I don't normally bring a handkerchief with me to speak, but after that video, I don't think I have much choice. I got a call last Saturday while I was on duty from Sheila Nowacki, Andy's mom. And she told me that part of the ceremony was going to be a pretty moving video and that she had a slight task for me. And she asked me if I would speak for a few minutes after the video to be positive. Now, as the commanding officer of 224, I don't get the option of saying no to the families of my KIAs for whom I was responsible. But in Sheila and Dennis's case, I was honored that they would even ask me to. So immediately I rogered up to the mission. So here we go. The only way I know to be positive in talking about Andy is to talk about, from my perspective and from the Marines' perspective in this room who shared time with him in combat, as to why did Andy die. Because I think the thing that's most lost in the public discourse about the ongoing global war on terror really is the why. We all know how Andy died. Unfortunately, he was struck by an improvised explosive device on an ASR in our zone. But I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about why Andy died. Andy died because he was out engaging the enemy. And the single most misunderstood aspect of this war is the enemy. And a professional warfighter focuses on one thing and one thing only, the enemy. He doesn't focus on timelines. He doesn't focus on how fast he can stand up Iraqi battalions. He focuses on the enemy. And there's a particular reason why we need to focus on this enemy. Because this enemy is real. This enemy is vile. This enemy is evil. And this enemy has a 100-year plan to destroy the United States of America. A 100-year plan. We think in terms of the next football season, and they're thinking in terms of 100 years from now and how they're going to destroy this nation. Can this enemy win this war against us? Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you absolutely he can. He can if he continues to focus on two things which he focuses on every day. The first thing this enemy focuses on is breaking the will of the American people. He does that through videos, he does that through propaganda, and he does that through information. The second way he can win this war is to continue to recruit future generations of jihadists. It was for these reasons, and because of this enemy, that Andy was in Iraq. And while so many still fail to get it, the enemy doesn't. The enemy understands Iraq is the focus of effort because he understands that as long as Marines and warriors like Andy are in Iraq, the will of the American people is foremost and in his face. He also understands that that is a will that can and does, at every opportunity of battle, destroy this enemy. And then the second thing that us being there does to this enemy, contrary to some popular opinion, is it does not create jihadists by us being there. Quite frankly, we deprive them of the next generation of jihadists because no one is more helped or more impressed with the gentle giants of America than the kids of the Arab world. And if you'll just let me tell you two very quick stories, I'll explain why that is. One day we were going out to conduct a raid to arrest the sergeant major and the operations officer of the Iraqi Army battalion that we were training. And upon moving into our cordon positions and the raid force hitting the objective and seizing the sergeant major of the Iraqi Army battalion, his very children, the very children of the sergeant major that we had in flex cuffs and blindfolded, were running around their front yard acting as if they were holding weapons and shooting at the Marines. And one of the Marines went up to him, and he took the interpreter with him, and he said, "Ask these kids what they're doing." And the interpreter asked him, and those kids said in English, "Mister, we play U.S. Marine, mister. We U.S. Marines." I don't think those kids are going to grow up to be jihadists. I think those kids are going to grow up to be the honorable people that they saw the U.S. Marines in their zone to be. Further proof of that was mentioned by your MC tonight when she showed you that picture of Andy and those two Iraqi kids. They say a picture tells 1,000 stories. You can look at it on your program. That's not a staged picture. That is honest respect for an American Marine, who in this case was Andy Nowacki. And there are thousands of him like there, affecting those Iraqi kids every single day. The second story I want to tell you about is the election, the very first Iraqi election that occurred in our zone. And in order to truly understand it, you have to back up to December of 2004. The election was scheduled for 31 January of 2005. Exactly 2 weeks before the election was to be held, the Iraqi government said there was no way that there would be an election in our zone. Because at that point in time, there were two triangles that were famous in Iraq. One was the Sunni Triangle, and one was the Triangle of Death. The Triangle of Death was our zone. And it was so named because for 4 months at that time, on a daily basis, we had gone forward, we had seized terrain, we had lived the misery of the Iraqi people, we had become their neighbors, and in so doing, we had slung steel and harsh language with this enemy on a daily basis. And they did not like that. They did not like the fact that these Marines were forward, living and earning the respect of the Iraqi people. But we were able to convince the Iraqi government that as a result of the efforts of Marines like Andy, the Iraqi people would come out and vote. We couldn't guarantee them it wouldn't be violent, but we guaranteed them they would come out and vote. Now I ask you to picture in 2 weeks having to put together 8 polling places. That meant we had to tactically go out 48 hours prior, and we had to seize the locations. We had to set up all the force protection that would allow the Marines to protect the Iraqis from what we knew would be constant and sure attacks on Election Day. And then most importantly, we had to transport 500 workers from the city of Baghdad down to our battalion FOB, house them for 2 days, and then move them safely to those 8 polling sites. Now you can rest assured that was one big juicy target that the terrorists wanted to hit. We were able to accomplish all that, but the most telling time in all of that was where we housed these 500 election workers was in our battalion chow hall. And my battalion Sergeant Major Payne, who's with me here tonight, had a section of our chow hall that was dedicated to our fallen Marines. At that time, there were 12 of them. He had their pictures, and we had an American and a Marine Corps flag. Now, for those of you that have never been to Iraq or never spent time with an Iraqi people, when you get 2 of them in a room together, the noise level, the amount of smoke, and the amount of drinking that goes on is pretty mind-numbing. When you put 500 of them in a facility, it borders on chaos. Now, we accepted that that was going to have to be the cost, that our chow hall was probably going to get pretty torn up, and it did, except for one spot. Anytime any of those Iraqi election workers got anywhere near the Sergeant Major's memorial, absolute, utter, respectful, solemn silence. They respected the Marines and what they were doing for them. And that was a sight that I will take with me to my grave, and that makes me challenge those that say we're creating jihadists. I argue we're doing just the opposite. On that very election day, the mortars flew. The mortars flew intently. All 8 of our sites started getting mortared and rocketed about 30 minutes before the polls were supposed to open. I was sitting in my COC thinking, well, there's the end of my career. I just convinced the whole world that we could have elections and they're blowing us up before they even start. But an amazing thing happened. In spite of all those mortars, in spite of all those rockets, in spite of the Marines who were providing security, telling the Iraqi people to seek cover, they refused to. And in broken English, constantly reminded the Marines, you will protect us. You have brought us democracy, and we will vote. To include one story from the south of our zone, where one young man pushed his 70-year-old father 4 miles under enemy fire in a shopping cart, and when asked by the Marines what on God's green earth did he think he was doing, he said, "My father has but one wish before he dies, to show you the respect of voting as a free man." 100 years. That's the enemy's plan. He is prepared. Are we? As long as we have warriors, gentle warriors like Andy, the unbelievable support of parents like Dennis and Sheila, who can do things like this despite having sacrificed what they have sacrificed, and the support of Americans like you, we cannot lose. Sheila asked me to be positive. I don't know how I can be anything but. If it weren't for warriors like Andy and the other ones you see in this room here tonight, we would not be able to gather tonight to laugh, to cry, and to celebrate. Sheila asked me to be positive. I don't know how to be anything else. I know now something I didn't know a few years ago. Being positive is not making the world the way you wish it would be. It's accepting the world the way it is and going out and doing what you can do to change it. I used to tell my young daughters when they'd see something on TV or read a fairy tale, I used to tell them there's no such thing as dragons. I don't tell them that anymore. There are dragons. There are fire-breathing, evil dragons that inhabit this world. But I tell them, don't be afraid, because for every dragon that's out there, there's 10 knights in shining armor that will go forth and suffer great hardship to protect you. And I've seen them and I've worked with them, and they're called United States Marines. So be positive. I'll be more than positive. I will be thankful and humbled that you asked me to speak tonight, and I will forever thank God Almighty for Andy, all the warriors like Andy, your amazing family, and this blessed land. May God bless and keep you all the days of your life.